All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to day 2 of the Canadian Open Data Summit. For those who might just be joining us today, I'm Mark Burns. I've been your MC for the last couple of days. And welcome to our delegates online. Thanks for sticking with us. I hope everyone had a good time yesterday, met some new people, learned some new things. I hope you got a chance to see a little bit of Whitehorse. We enjoy having new folks up to visit. One of the interesting things about open data is it's not so much about the technology. And listen, there have been great sessions about how the technology works. We heard a lot about CCAN and what you might be able to do with that and how to get started with it. But at the end of the day, the real story is around the culture of sharing, the culture of using, of reuse, of packaging things. I think it's really interesting how we're seeing different innovations where open data sets are now becoming the training sets for artificial intelligence and machine learning, where you have these robots sucking up entire data sets and then using that matching, using the metadata to add intelligence to it and start to process that in ways that we haven't seen before. You see things like Midjourney, the art program, you stick in some keywords, natural language processor, and then next thing you know, you're looking at a picture of a monkey riding a bike because that's what you typed in, and there's this beautiful picture done by the robot for you. So like the whole idea that our data sets are turning from things you sort of download, stick it in your spreadsheet, do some magic with it, and sort of come up with your conclusions. And that's certainly a legitimate and ongoing use of these data sets. But now they're becoming the training sets for robots to do the same kind of analysis. So I think that's really interesting. I think it's going to have pretty profound implications for how we package, how we use metadata, how we make this stuff available, what happens around the APIs. So all of that stuff, I think, is a really interesting horizon getting closer to us. So thanks for everybody sharing your ideas and sort of taking me on that journey over the last day. So our first speaker this morning, we've talked about open data, and open information has an impact on so many areas of society. A person who's has an acute understanding of what this looks like, and especially the impact on the economy, is our next speaker, the Honorable Ranj Pillai. Minister Pillai was first elected to the Yukon Legislative Assembly in the general election held in November 2016. He's re-elected to the House in December of, he was re-elected April 2021. And then he was first appointed to cabinet in 2016. The minister is currently responsible for the Department of Economic Development, Tourism and Culture, Yukon Housing Corp, Yukon Liquor Corporation, and Yukon Lottery Corporation. So anytime you want to have some fun, you should talk to Minister Pillai. And I will say, proper acknowledgement, Yukon Economic Development has been a great supporter of this event. So again, if you're having a good time here, if you're finding it worthwhile, part of it has been made possible by Minister Pillai and his department. So with that, please welcome Minister Pillai to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. For those that, for folks that have traveled to attend the conference, after going through those portfolios, like I'll put on the economic development and tourism and culture hat and say, look, here's some great open data for you. You can do your Christmas shopping here, and there's lots of different options. And make sure before you leave our beautiful territory, you have an opportunity to go out and spend some dollars while you're here. Look, with that being said, look, I want to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territories of the Kwanlin First Nation and the Tonkwatchin Council. Today marks the second day of the 2022 Open Data Summit. And again, very proud to be able to host this year's event in Whitehorse, Yukon. Hosting the 2022 Summit, again, is significant for our territory because the Government of Yukon and the Canadian Open Data Society has recently entered into a new agreement with the intent to increase the ranks and proficiency of data-driven entrepreneurs all across the country. So by working together, 2 pre-summit workshops were organized with the purpose of building awareness and capacity and data literacy. Attendees were encouraged to attend this year's summit, again, in order to further sculpt the business plan for a data-driven company or idea. So again, I'm truly honored to join Candace Impressive open data community this morning. And so for those online as well, welcome. And for the chance to discuss, share, and inspire each other as fellow practitioners and advocates for open data in the North. Again, it's through these sessions, such as this one, that we can learn how to gain more insight into our organizations and move forward by making better informed decisions on the topic of open data. Technology and innovation, again, are becoming the fastest growing sectors across the globe, which you all know. The technology sector here, the technology sector accounts for about 4.5% of global GDP, and is expected to double within the next 10 or 15 to 20 years. The Yukon is actively developing our capabilities, and our technology industry continues to grow, representing 3.7% of Yukon's GDP in 2020. So I know folks will be primarily here over the yesterday and today and the next day that you're here, but some of our team that's in the room from economic development, if you have a chance, maybe Jason, I'm going to bug you. You guys maybe put your hand up, dev folks that are in the room. There's a number of people here. Please have a chance to speak with them. And there's just, again, I think you probably were a bit enlightened yesterday for those who have traveled and about what's happening here. And I heard there was some great talks, Paul Gruner's talk with leading the Tahltan Development Corporation in Northern British Columbia. But again, here, just some of the things that we've done, we're pretty proud of, whether it was Northlight Innovation Center, some of the work we've done around that, which was quickly filled. It's about a 20,000 square foot space that we put together to help with our ecosystem, and our team was big drivers on that with a number of NGOs, and that's led, and then going out and as well for the folks that are on the private sector side that are either listening or watching, helping capitalize another investment fund for the tech sector, and doing that with 7 different First Nation governments at the table. So major crown corporations that invested both in Quebec and Alberta, and then having our First Nation governments come to the table, Yukon government. So pretty excited some of the stuff we've been able to accomplish and continue to help in that in that space. Again, data is a wonderful tool that's valuable for both private sector and public sector organizations. Again, it is proven to assist in gaining insight into various trends and business opportunities for nations all over the world. Look, I just want to give you an example in sort of real time for us in the North on when we think about open data, and just having a bit of a chat this morning, Mark, about it. So here's a great example for Yukon government. And then you can compare this to investment across Canada, whether it be in the tech sector or other sectors. So we have a federal team coming in tomorrow, and one of the federal ministers will be here, and we're meeting with a number of global players when it comes to critical minerals. Part of what we'll end up doing is the Yukon Geological Survey here with Inside Energy Mines Resources will then do a presentation and look at some of the data that we collect. And we provide that. We'll provide that back to Canada, but we also provide that back to the private sector interests that are here. And that begins the discussion of when we think about, say the 11 critical minerals that are here in the Yukon. The downstream right now for us, when we think about that, what does that mean from an economic development? Well, we know what it means for a green future, first of all, extremely important. We know that across the globe, people are hurrying to figure out where they can find these minerals. And I can tell you, even in the North and in the Yukon, we've had, I've hosted every Nordic ambassador. I just came from a meeting with the Consul General from Asia. We are constantly having a global conversation. And when people come, the first thing they're doing is, what open data do you have? And what can you share with us? So we can make some decisions, whether that's on further investment, direct foreign investment, you name it. When we look at the projects that we have in the pipeline right now, we're talking about $5 to $6 billion in CapEx. So those are real numbers in this country, even in a territory we have a population of just over 40,000 people. So when you think about when a campus, like I've said to John Tory in Toronto before, when you think about when you're going out and trying to get the Google campus, or you're trying to go out and get a major player in that sector, what does that mean? Well, that means, $4 billion to downtown Toronto. So for us, when we think about how we share open data, how we use it, well, we're talking about $5-6 billion in opportunity as well. So these are, how it starts and how we share our information and what that leads to is extremely significant in what happens within our economy. Again, the government of Yukon has been working extensively with open data and the ability to provide a wide range of access to this information to the public. For example, the open.yukon.ca data website allows users to browse data sets by topic, and again, can find information such as housing and shelter costs, renewable energy maps, water license application, Yukon emergency management information. Some additional ways that Canada has optimized the use of open data include healthcare resource planning, predictive supply chain forecasting, and smart city infrastructure planning, which has again been used for responsive traffic management. In a climate of technological expansion, it remains crucial to increase Yukon's capacity in data literacy, to uncover new entrepreneurship opportunities for Yukoners within the territory. Consequently, the government of Yukon is committed to building a thriving innovation economy by supporting technological growth and entrepreneurship while simultaneously ensuring appropriate safety measures remain in place to protect the privacy of open data users. Prior to the summit, the Yukon has hosted again a series of fundamental data workshops for Whitehorse businesses and entrepreneurs. Again, it's our hope that by working alongside other members of the open data community and continuing to implement multiple programs and training opportunities, Yukoners will continue to thrive within the ever-expanding and changing market. The Technology and Innovation Branch of the Department of Economic Development is tasked with supporting the technological and innovation sectors within the Yukon. Supporting organizations within the technology and innovation sectors remains a priority for our government. And I think partially for us, another little bit of a pitch is when you come, I know it's chilly, and I know it was 25 in central Canada for those, and I know it was pretty cold in BC on the weekend. But anyway, what I will say is, look, what happens here is it's really about quality of life. We're not trying to encourage 5,000 people to move to the Yukon, but we are encouraging people that want to enhance their quality of life and be part of a knowledge-based economy to move here. And that's what we're continuing to see. So again, as folks, that seems to be a big driver for us, people making those decisions to say, yeah, you know what, I'm only 2 hours from downtown Vancouver and I'd like to work in a tech sector. I can do it from here. And how can I be a part of this ecosystem? And again, that's what part of our team is doing, continually out there, navigating that and recruiting. Again, for example, we've partnered with the Government of Canada and the Tech Yukon to support in the implementation of the Canada Digital Adoption Program. So this program will help up to 140 businesses to go online over the next 3 years and is currently accepting applications for small and medium businesses in our territory. We also continue to work alongside Yukon University, ComIT, and our First Nation partners, and have successfully delivered coding training programs to First Nation students and continue to do that. As of October 2022, 50 First Nation citizens have registered for our coding training. And again, I look forward to seeing more students take part in this educational opportunity. I'm also pleased that associations such as Tech Yukon, whose society represents 27 technological companies within the territory, are enabling Yukoners with more access to for the delivery of incredible programs and services. Additionally, Yukon University Innovation and Entrepreneurship Program allows learners and innovators and entrepreneurs access to living laboratories of focused study and advancement within technology development, social justice, climate action, community development, and sustainable resource development. In addition to these incredible opportunities, the Department of Economic Development has been hard at work in developing a new 5-year innovation strategy that will increase the availability for Yukoners to create, grow, and mature their business ideas in the North. And we've been lucky. We've brought in a team of folks from basically global players. Norm Fraser is a gentleman who spends a lot of time here. He used to be a professor at Oxford and is just launched a new company called Soft Iron. Folks like that just love coming to the Yukon, that help sort of guide us and advise us. The same thing with some of the lead people on the investment side at Business Development Canada and others across the country that we tap into, as well as our local leaders in this space. In addition to these incredible opportunities, again, we're continuing to make sure that through our education system and through the supports that we have for students, such as the coding training, that we're continuing to bring young Yukoners up into this ecosystem. It's the goal of this government to continue providing the necessary momentum for the expansion and diversification of our economy. Our new strategy that I just spoke about will seek to pollinate and attract startup companies, as well as nurture the Yukon's digital ecosystem. So this year's summit is being, again, attended by learners, teachers, and industry pioneers who will, again, continue to pave the road for open data professionals everywhere. And as technology industry grows, so does the desire for the Yukon to be a leader in this innovative and competitive market. And I'm proud of Yukon's innovation ecosystem and confident that it has the potential to support any entrepreneurs who are ready to take what they learned from the summit and turn it into a startup business. Again, thank you for the opportunity to come and speak today. Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate it. And again, thank you for choosing the Yukon as your destination for such a conference. And again, have a great rest of your day. And hopefully you can sneak out and check out a few of the amazing things that we have around the city. And again, make sure before you leave, you start planning your summer vacation back here after that. So again, thanks for coming.
Well, there you have it. That's two ministers for two in Yukon government who have demonstrated, I would say, a pretty clear commitment to evolving the Yukon's economy and evolving our public service into a more knowledge-driven, data-driven organization. I should mention that we are looking for people who want to be part of that in our open data team. So if that sounds like you, catch up with me via email, catch up with me here at the conference. I'd like to talk about that. Let's move into our next keynote, which I think is going to be a very interesting one. John Weigelt leads Microsoft Canada's strategic policy and technology efforts. Mr. Weigelt helps individuals, organizations across Canada innovate with technology while avoiding the unintended consequences that might arise. He leads Canadian outreach on a variety of technology policies, including economic development, privacy, security, government 3.0, accessibility, AI, ethics, and interoperability. He also leads Microsoft Canada's Responsible AI program and was one of the authors of Canada's national standards on ethics in the design and use of automated decision systems. Please welcome, from Microsoft Canada, John Weigelt.
I always start to shake when I'm behind the podium, so I'm going to wander around. So it's great to be here today. I'm always listening to that bio, and I got to change it sometime. You know, I like people just to say, John's a good guy and he knows some stuff. And then if you notice from the picture that I gave, then I've been around for a while too. You got to probably say, you know, cheapers John better update his photo. One of the things I don't mention is that before coming into Microsoft some 20 years ago, I worked at Treasury Board Secretariat in the Government of Canada and was part of the government online initiatives. And if we remember way back then, you know, we were #1 for the years that I was there at least. And, you know, there's no connection between not being #1 anymore and my leaving, but, you know, it's just there. I kind of think about that for a while. And so it's great to be here to talk to you today about open data. I've been working in the open data field for quite some time and being able to see how things have progressed as we've gone along. It's a little bit of audience participation here. So how many people feel that they're familiar with open data? So a lot of familiarity. How many people feel they're proficient with open data? Oh, a lot less. How many people feel they're experts in open data? So a few with experts. And so we see that, and when I talk to people around this idea of data, you know, people that are publishing data and putting data out there in the community, often they see themselves as the data custodians for their organization. You know, they act as that controller, they act as that safeguarder of that data that's put out there, where they see themselves as the data trustee, or maybe even the data advocate. And you know, my mind works in crazy ways, or maybe, you know, my kids read too many books of them. I always thought of the Lorax. You know, the Lorax spoke on behalf of the trees, which everyone needs. Well, perhaps we're the Loraxes of data, because data is something that everyone needs. So this morning, I'll chat with you a little bit about what we see as part of the history of open data in Canada, where we see some of the points of inflection for open data in Canada and what we could do in the future for open data in Canada, as long as we take those positive steps. Now, if there's one thing I want you to leave my session with, is that there's been great progress that's been made in open data, but there's far more that we can do. We've got fantastic tools, technologies, governance structures that allow us to leapfrog and go further than everyone else. I find it always great to find international examples about open data and what's happening around the world. I want to hear about more Canadian open data examples. I want to hear about Canadian success stories, right? And so, hopefully we can spur on that enthusiasm, that innovation as we move along. I'll figure out the buttons here. There we go. So brief history of open data in Canada. Anyone know when the first open data initiative started in Canada? It was their friends in Vancouver, 2009. They launched their beta site of open data in Canada. And David Eves, world-renowned expert in open data, kind of behind and starting that motion going. And so thanks to the Wayback Machine, we were able to find that site. Then we have Toronto, not to be outdone. Central Canada, the center of the universe, has to help out there. Edmonton then came in. I'm not sure which buttons I'm using here. There we go. I just need to be closer. Has their data catalog. Then Government of Canada, 2011, put out their open data catalog, and I couldn't find their 2011 site, so I apologize. This is a 2015 site. With British Columbia put their open data, Montreal, Quebec City. And so this I call kind of the epoch 1 of open data. So community, grassroots movements, putting data out there. Let's try this out. Real groundswell type motion and people really trying to figure out what this open data thing means and just getting data out there. It was a field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. We'll just put data out there. We're not going to look at it. It's out there and people are going to use it. And people are going to build apps and they're going to get out there. And we saw some apps get built, right? We saw this great app built for TransLink BC is one of them that sticks in my mind. A better transit scheduler than the city could develop. And yet it wasn't used. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that, right? Spaghetti code and code things and ownership and pride, that tends to happen. Then we get into epoch 2. So about 10 years passed. So the hidden 10 years, things dropped off, 10 years passed, people kind of dusted things off. So, hey, where's the open data side? And we see that sites pop up and, it's fantastic to see that Yukon has published their open data site. And let's be clear, Yukon had open data before 2019 and it was published out there, right? But we saw this big resurgence of open data to around 2019 with Vancouver relaunching their site, Edmonton relaunching their site, putting new tools up. So now you had graphical tools so you could actually put the data to use as a data newbie, right? Especially loved, I went to Edmonton's website the other day and saw all the trees in the city, all the trees with edible fruits, and was able to see like thousands of trees displayed on a map, simple, easy to use, and finally put some of that data to use. And so that was a great thing. But we're now in the second era and we have to figure out, well, what do we see on these sites? Now, I apologize to colleagues at Treasury Board Secretariat. This is today's pick on portal. So I'm picking on this portal. And so as I've watched this site, there was at one point over 85,000 data sets on the Canadian federal open data site. They've pared it down. And I think if they actually go there today, there's 4,000 less. I think there's actually around 30,000 data sets that are there. And, majority from Natural Resources Canada, Statistics Canada. And so a lot of graphing and charting data sets. So Statistics Canada has their data sets there. And then thanks to other geographies, we've got data sets from those. But, let's be clear. So I understand the periodic table of impact for open data, right? So there's a whole bunch of different ways we can measure this. We heard some financial measurements yesterday, and we heard some impact measurements. And, being from Microsoft, we do some of these financial impact things, and some can be dubious. And what's a secondary, tertiary, fifth order impact of these things. But I looked at the apps. And so there's 102 apps in the library. All right. And so out of those 102 apps, 62 are developed from the Government of Canada, 35 are public, and 5 are from a code organization. So let's double click on that and you find many are version 0.9. So an app was created at a hackathon, at a GovCamp. I ran 2 GovCamps myself to try to do these things. They're created and then they're left. So there's many apps that are there, several not in the store, so you can find them. You can't do anything with them. It's not downloaded, not kept up. Then I started to look and said, well, hold on a second here. What's the top rated app from the public domain? So there's one 5-star app. Out of the 35, there's one 5-star app. And it's something called Credit Card FinCom. And it's not even open data app. Somebody built this app and they just posted it there to get promotion. And if you look at the comments, it's kind of hilarious as you watch it. And so as we look at putting this data out there, we really have to do a good job, a better job of making sure that, hey, we've got some way that people say that we're taking this seriously, that this is important, that, hey, here are the tools that you can use. Here's the community we engage. Here's those pieces we can engage. And again, I'm not picking on anybody here. It's just an observation that we have on that particular site. As we see going into the second era, what have we done to improve upon stage one, era one of open data? Well, we've updated the data sets. We've gotten better at versioning. You know, we're still not perfect, but we're getting better at versioning. So know that, hey, this data set's from the previous 24 hours. If I want the day before, then I got to go here. If I want the day before, I got to go here. We're improving discoverability, making it easier to find the data that's important to us. We're including additional contextual information. We'll talk a little bit more about this later, but we've got a little bit more context around the data that's there. This is especially important as we move into an AI world. We need to have a very crisp understanding of the context of the data. When we look at tools like Clearview, where they were using public available data that was pulled from a website prior to particular mindsets and philosophies around the treatment of data, you know, they didn't have that context, and all of a sudden they get into hot water as things change. So we need better contextual information. We've got to fix the broken data sets. Broken links just don't work. The data types, and then what we see as well is this publication on GitHub is really helping catalyze things. It's really helping with adoption, so that now people can go to that code library and be able to adopt these things and understand how it evolves, right? We need to also recognize how hackathons help us in this domain, right? We've got to change the mindset that hackathons are going to give us new apps. They're not designed for that. Hackathons are built for mentorship, build communities, and then do pilots. And then from there, we can take that pivot and then build to a real world application. So we can grow out from there. Make sense so far? Catching? One of the other things that we often miss is this outreach from government into private sector around doing more with open data. Is everybody aware of the Innovation Science Economic Development Canada Innovation Superclusters? So it's a great program where the government of Canada puts up to $1 billion of matching funding towards innovation across 5 sectors. Big competition to find these 5 sectors. And across the country, digital tech, the proteins industry supercluster, it's really a misnomer. It's agriculture. Think of Beyond Meat, those types of agricultures. Next generation manufacturing, Scale AI, which is AI-enabled supply chain, and the ocean supercluster. And one of the edicts to each of the superclusters was to create a data environment that will float all boats for the industry. So go out there and do projects that are going to share data across your industry to be able to build that out. So 2 examples of why this didn't necessarily work as well as they thought it would. One is in the proteins-based supercluster. And you think, okay, well, I've got soil temperature, I've got pH, I've got wind ratings, I know what kind of fertilizer. Turns out there's a very, very active competitive environment in the agriculture environment. The soybean people don't talk to the corn people. The corn people don't talk to the wheat people. The tractor people don't talk with one another. And so your John Deere doesn't talk with Caterpillar, doesn't talk with Kubota. Nobody talks to one another. And so trying to share data in those environments gets very, very difficult. In the ocean supercluster, we had this great idea. We were going to build a digital twin of the Bay of Fundy. Now imagine that. This geographically unique region in the world, we're going to create a digital representation of that Bay of Fundy. Quite an audacious goal. And our thought was this, that if we create one level of resolution, think of a meter square resolution, that could be a legacy that's given to school children in the region or all across Canada, so that you could navigate in the metaverse this region and be able to see how geographically unique it was. We then thought, if you get a foot resolution, so you get more fine-grained visibility, then people would be willing to pay for that. Because now you can start to look at building buildings on that environment. Perhaps it's the docks and St. John or other places. And then the last piece we thought was, if you really need real deep accuracy to the millimeter or to the centimeter, think of using a water generation, electrical generation turbine. right? And you're sending a diver down in some of the highest tides in the world, you really want to know where you're going to fix things. So you're willing to put safety first and thought, hey, with that resolution there, people will be willing to spend a lot of money and give a lot of money for that type of thing. It didn't fly. We couldn't make the business case. We just couldn't make the business case for all those stakeholders to move out in that direction. Now we do have a digital twin that's now in the Hibernia area, looking at where they're doing the deep sea mining, oil extraction, but much smaller case, but showing some of the challenges around sharing this open data in these environments. So we need to frame the conversation. We need to reframe the conversation around some of these things that are causing us to be have delays. Data is not oil. We can create new data. We create new data all the time. And the old data that kicks around, we probably can't use it. Anybody using CompuServe data anymore? That's pretty old, right? So it's a different paradigm. So we need to kind of shift out of that paradigm. Open data is not only for government. Open data is for the broad community. We need to open up data across civil society, industry, and government to work together. There's this thought about data needing to be very accurate. I can work with inaccurate data. Just tell me it's inaccurate. I can work through the bumps in the road along that. All data doesn't need to be free. We need to recognize there's a time value to data, that there's resolution data, and we need to start to recognize streaming data. Get out of this tabular constraint and say, look, there's this streaming data that's important as well. I need to have real-time data that I can share. There's shared data interests, so it's not all public data. There's communities of interest that are there. Not all data has privacy interests. I have to tell you, a number of times you go into a room to talk about sharing data, and then all of a sudden the privacy elephant shows up, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and pushes everything out of the room. And we might not even be talking about personal data, right? When we talk about connected communities or smart cities, it's not all personal data. We're not tracking people like some of those Hollywood movies suggest. It's not winner take all. Just look at some of the social media meltdowns right now. Everybody moving to Mastodon, right? We see that stuff happening. We see people moving from different networks. I know my kids aren't on the same social networks I am, and they're moving around. So we have to look at these temporal changes in those environments. And then the last one is if you build it, they might not come. Right? We need to be very focused. And hearing yesterday around this published for a purpose, I think was quite rewarding and was an interesting take on things. We also need to recognize innovations. And so innovations that are changing our view, data sheets for data sets. We have this nice little index on the back of the Campbell soup can that tells us what's in the ingredients in that soup can. We need to do that for data. We need to understand where the data was collected. What's the context of the collection? What's the permissions for use of the collection? We need to have this better description so that we can understand how we best use that. There's differential privacy that allows us to protect and safeguard data sets and share those data sets. Differential privacy allows us to obfuscate certain data so that we protect the privacy of individuals and be able to move that further. We have many de-identification techniques. This one's particularly cool. Khaled Al-Amam out of Ottawa is a friend of mine, has developed and built a company around building derived synthetic data. And what that means is they can take a set of health records, put it through an AI algorithm, and create a completely fictitious set of data that has the same characteristics as the original set. Imagine that for open data. Now that privacy is like right off the table. I can now do research on the data and have confidence that I can use that in a free and open way. Watermarking to figure out where it's at. We hear a lot about big data and getting more data sets, a ton of research happening on little data. What does that mean? What's the minimum set of data that I need to be able to reason over to get an accurate response? And so changing and flipping our mindset around that. Federated learning. So there's great work that's happening around federated learning environments where you can reason over data and not have access to it. We heard about data governance and new data governance structures. Yesterday, I heard a new one from Josh around data institutions, but with data trusts, data communes, data collectives, data collaboratives, all our governance structures that allow us to share data better. It's allowing us to have conversations about data. Who's got authority for the data and be able to move over that. Bianca Wiley and Sean Martin McDonald from CG are great thought leaders in this regard around talking about how we best create these collaborative environments for sharing data. And we have some work happening around data governance in the CIO Strategy Council, where we're trying to define a standard of what data governance actually is. because there's a misperceptions around data governance. A lot of time when we hear about data governance, it really leans into information management or the processes from collection to disposal of data. And it doesn't talk about organizational structures and those different characteristics that we have of that. And so Microsoft has gone further with our open data campaign. So we've had open data since the initial stages of open data environments. We were actually hosting some of the predecessors to CCAN and DCAN on our environments. Edmonton was once hosted on the Microsoft environment on the open data sites. And so we've recently, along with the other communities, resurrected and refreshed our open data campaign. And it's really to close that gap. For data access for the digitally disadvantaged, to be able to allow people access to data assets. And so the first three things we want to do is, one, put together some principles around, data should be made open, it should be transparent. Second piece was around having connections and collaborations with other organizations, and you heard some of those yesterday. And the third is just to make it easier to use those tools. As we come out of the second year, our priorities are to scale out that stewardship. Is to grow those data collaborations, make data sharing easier, and advance the policy discussion. So really driving forward these better communications and connections. And you see that open data sets in Microsoft Research Open Data or Azure Open Data. So there's a lot of data that's available for your use around environment, around user behaviors, around health information. But it all comes down to reasoning around data. Why is this important? When I talk to you about AI and ask you what picture pops into your mind as a Canadian, your picture probably pops in around, this robot chasing people through the scenes in Hollywood, or perhaps it's Will Smith getting chased through LA, or perhaps it's Arnold Schwarzenegger coming around and doing those things, right? We have this negative perception around AI. And actually Deloitte did their Canada at 175 report that suggests that if Canada is going to seize the opportunity associated with AI, we have to overcome this crisis of trust in technology and AI. We have to get better skills in technology and AI in order to be able to overcome that. And so in order to do that, we need to get specific about AI. We hear about how Canada is this great nation around AI, but what does that mean? Who are the people that are doing the work in AI, and in what areas are we focused on? And AI has got all these different areas, but it really comes down to this foundational element, the data. You need to be able to understand the data. You need to be recognized the context of collection. You need to recognize unintended bias or existing bias in the data. You need to understand the temporal characteristics, because all your reasoning is going to be based upon that. And I have to tell you, there's a lot of open data that's out there that's just garbage. Like you look at National Institutes of Health, they have this database, 100,000 medical images, chest x-rays that claim to be able to help people diagnose chest disease like cancer or other things. Turns out when they look closer at the data, 40% of it was mislabeled. If I'm training an AI regime, a model on this data, I've got to be sure about what I'm training it on. I need to make sure that the data is correct so that the rest of this stuff just works. I need to be able to make sure that I adhere to AI principles of fairness, of reliability and safety, privacy, security, inclusiveness, transparency, and accountability. That's what this data is being used for. It's being used to help make decisions. It's being used to help augment individuals in their decision-making. We need to make sure we can trust that data as it moves forward. And that's where the standard for ethical use of AI came from, is in this thought that, look, Treasury Board Secretariat has the algorithmic impact assessment guidance. We need to be able to extend that guidance to the community and help them build responsible AI into their solutions. Because we can use AI for good. We can use AI and data to change our world. We can change and solve some of our tough problems. Now, I'm quite proud that at Microsoft, we have an AI for Good program. And it really looks across 5 key areas. AI for Earth, how do we help protect our environment? AI for accessibility, how do we help those with adaptive needs? And quite frankly, that community is all of us. I've got my glasses in my briefcase. That's why I can't use notes on my PowerPoint presentation. So I got to memorize all this stuff. AI for humanitarian action, cultural heritage, and AI for health. And so some examples, in BC, the Terramera is doing regenerative agriculture. And the idea is that, hey, if you can put some of those refuse, the waste from the agriculture community, if you can use precision Precision application of fertilizer. If you can monitor water as it comes in and out, you can be a better steward of the earth. And so they use a tool called FarmBeats, which brings Internet of Things devices and then reasons over those devices about how to best monitor your crops. So they put forward a $600 million project, a proposal to the government of BC to be able to build out this environment using data and AI to grow out those tools. We're especially proud of the partnership that we fostered in the territory of Nunavut and with language. And so working with community elders, we were able to take the Inuktitut language and two dialects in particular, the Inuktitut and I apologize, Inuit Nakutun dialects, and put that into the Microsoft Translator product. And so what this allowed the community to do is, the translator works by having side-by-side translations. And so you take the one language translation and you have the other language translation and you simply scan them in. And so working with community elders, we have young people working with elders to build this language in to be able to then do that translation. And we hope to take this to broader Indigenous languages across the country. And if they follow the Roman approach to language, where you have kind of the subject and characteristics, that can work. We do understand that there's some Indigenous languages that are a little bit different, more metaphoric speaking, which are a little bit more challenging. Cherokee, for example, is a more metaphoric language that makes it more difficult to use that translation with. But working with the community to maintain those languages, because we're seeing languages disappear at a horrendous rate. And so if we can safeguard these languages and have that engagement between youth and elders, it's critically important to bring that forward. Using tools like differential privacy to share health information between BC Cancer and the Fred Hutch Cancer Institute. And so building out a data trust where there's a discussion around which data can be used at what time, what are those key indices, who can access the data, and how do we safeguard that, has helped us then do great research around cancer care and cancer health. Another project that's underway using confidential compute is using the banks. And so the banks have transaction history that they maintain within their environments. They have been able to protect and encrypt that transaction history. So think of 3 separate data sets that are all remaining in place, right? They're meshed together using confidential compute, where you have an algorithm that reasons over the 3 different repositories of data without it ever leaving those organizations, without ever revealing, to be able to discern when there's human trafficking happening. And it pulls out the human trafficking indices, sends them to FinTrack Canada so that they can get tracked back. Really quite amazing opportunities to be able to do more with sharing data in a trusted and a friendly way. We've also launched the Planetary Computer, which you heard a little bit about yesterday, which is a open data set and compute resources to help then solve the climate crisis. And so it includes a data catalog, APIs, hubs, and applications that allow people to share data around what they're seeing happening around the globe. Now, it started in the US, so if you go to the Planetary Computer website, you'll find a lot of US-centric websites around forest cover and water tables, but it's expanding out to Europe and then to the global environment. And we encourage individuals to share openly the data to the Planetary Computer so that we can have that broader access and insight into the data that's shaping the world that we live around. I don't know how I'm for time, but I was just, as I think about closing up, and we can have time for questions as well at the end. Now, what are those things that you can do? So what's your call to action as you leave here today? I think the first one is skills development. We need to share with our teams, with our bosses, with our policymakers, what open data means and how data can help shape the policy imperatives and the go forward imperatives, missions of our individual organizations. I was having a great conversation earlier around skills development, and we often don't spend a lot of time on skills development. We talk about ICT skills and we think about STEM and coding and whatnot. We also have to think about the other way around. We need to skill everybody to understand the importance of this. We need physicians to understand IT skills. We need lawyers to understand IT skills. We need policymakers to understand IT and what it means. We need to help nudge and adjust that frame of reference so that as we go into wave 3 of open data, we can start to leverage some of these tools and we can overcome those barriers that we've had before. We can have all new discussions where we don't have the friction around the privacy, around the sharing, around the openness. We can now say, hey, we have a technology fix for that. We can now do this. We have a governance fix for that. We can now do this. Let's move on and do more. We can determine appropriate measurements and metrics. Let's measure these things in ways that make sense to people and not just to help us say, well, here's how we've accomplished over the years. We need to build trust in the community, trust in the data, trust in who we share information with, trust that people will work through that so that we not only have publication, but we can also have that trusted data sharing. Open shouldn't get in the way of more open, right? So there are people on the one side that say it should just all be out there, just publish or perish. Well, maybe not. Maybe there's some stuff that, hey, in the research environment, I can share more freely because I've got research licenses that allow me to do that. Ruthlessly scope initiatives. We often start off and we have the sky's the limit for that opportunity. Let's scope the initiatives on something that is practical that we can accomplish and then increment on it. One of our mantras when I was in government online was ruthless incrementalism. Start off small, little step, and then we'll take a little step tomorrow, take a little step tomorrow, but always move forward. Let's always take those little steps. Let's always just move that yardstick a little bit further instead of simply talking about it. Let's do it. Let's move that yardstick forward by doing those things. It's an exceptionally exciting time to be in the open data space. An exceptionally exciting time to be in the AI space, to reason over data. There's so much opportunity here to be able to grow the business, to grow capabilities, to grow Canadian Indigenous solutions. We just need to seize that opportunity. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. And do I have time for questions or?
Hello, thank you. Appreciate the presentation. And my name is James Delorme, and I'm former chief of Klahoos First Nation. And back in the day, wasn't that long ago, but you know, we were discussing about our data, you know, how we deal with our data in our communities. And we were just at that, you know, fresh stage of trying to realize that, you know, the larger companies, data companies, where we didn't even understand where our data was going and how it was, you know, interacting with the federal government and various other ways with Microsoft and Google. And so we're at a different stage now. You know, our communities are becoming more educated, more enlightened about open data and what that means, but also about data sovereignty. And that's a key piece. And so I work with the Dene Nation, the AFN Dene Nation, and we're embarking on a huge project with data sovereignty and with the First Nations Information Governance Center. And it's really key that partnerships that we have found are really at the threshold of how we have that data sovereignty and address the open data. So the relationships that Microsoft is having with communities, especially in BC, where we've seen that quite prevalent, is really critical. So I agree with all the pieces that you presented, very succinct and completely makes sense. But I'd just love to hear, John, what are some of the partnerships that you're working on? What are some of the things that you can do with Indigenous communities that you can help, you know, boost maybe that knowledge base and that understanding that we need to have with feel more trust and comfort in working with Microsoft? Thank you.
Well, great question. And it is something that we're working very, very aggressively on, is to figure out what is the best relationship and what's the best approach. I think first and foremost, we have to recognize that we need to recognize the individuality of each particular region and each particular Indigenous community, because our experience has been that in the past, we've kind of set a program to say, hey, we need to reach out to Indigenous communities, and we've created a program, right? And as a Microsoft company, we're all about scale. And so what ends up happening is you get this scale program that's really tone deaf, right? Because it doesn't recognize the individual needs of the community. So we had to change to understand that each individual community has their own needs, has their own philosophies about how they work with their partners and where they want to fit into the agenda. The second piece is then within skilling and skilling with the communities. And this is not just hardcore IT skills, but it's understanding the broader impact, right? So if all of a sudden you bring social media into a community that hasn't been connected, right? So what is the material impact on the mental well-being of the communities? Because these tools are also weapons. in that regard. And so if you open up that Pandora's box, what can happen is people start to feel very isolated very quickly because they might not feel they have the same capacities as other communities. And so we have to overcome that from the skilling perspective. And so we've partnered with the Digital Tech Supercluster around skilling the Maritime First Nations along the coast of BC because there is fiber optic cabling coming all the way up the coast. And so how do we light that up and how do we use that? We're also then skilling our own teams around hiring. And how do we recognize the skills and abilities that are grown now in these communities and bring these people in to help us understand what are the needs? So don't do to us without us, right? So what are the needs and how do we bring that in? And we've got some overt training that we've gotten for all our managers that is intended to recognize alternative approaches to getting qualifications. And so there's far more openness and approachability then for bringing the community in. And then from there, it's specific projects, right? And so is this the Digital Divide project? We're working with the Tahltan Nation up in with Rio Tinto and Tech Resources, where they're looking at tailing ponds and the biodiversity in the tailing ponds. And so part of that is a very strong community focus to have the local community manage that project from end to end and just leverage those tools that we provided. So I think it's multidisciplinary that we're looking at doing that, but really the big focus is on the people aspect is how I would put it. You're welcome.
Hey, John. This is on. Hey, John. Great presentation. I think a lot of people were captivated through it, which was really nice. And just hearing the history of all this was really, really great. Things that I actually forget about. My question is, and I'll give a little context. At the very beginning of your presentation, you talked about how Canada was in the top place in the world. We are no longer, right? Your lists that you had on the final slide, so I'm thinking about your bookends, is a great list, but it's a minimum requirement, I think, not an ambitious list. So what takes us back to, hell, we don't even have to go for top 1, top 5. How do we get to the top 5 again?
Well, you caught me there, right? So one of the things I've promised to do in my career after leaving government is to be very, very careful about our partners in government and not to poke them in the eye too much, right? Those are things we can do in quiet conversations that are perhaps better where we can be more frank. I think first off, it's a cultural shift, right? I would say, look, we need to be bold, we need to be brash, we need to own the podium. Right. So we need to set that goal and understand what that goal is looking like and have those measurements behind it. Then we need to change the way that we do our projects. I think fundamentally we have to change the way we do our projects. Look, I've used the vaccination exposure, COVID exposure app as an example, right? So we've got an application that is developed by outside developers working with Apple and Google, creating this app on their framework. It's reviewed by privacy commissioners. So across the country, privacy commissioners have looked at it and said, hey, this is a great app, let's use this. It's adopted by governments who endorse this app as well. So how many downloads of this app happened across the time? And let's face it, this app could literally save your life at the time. 3 million downloads out of what, 35 and change individuals, 36, I didn't look this morning, how many population? Right. And so we need to be able to get a new way to get these apps out there. We need to figure out a new way to engage individuals so that they're using those services. And part of that comes from talking about the critical events. When I was in Government Online, it was all about citizen-centered service delivery. And we did vignettes and we did little, how do they call it? What they do for movies, right? Kind of the little letter boards to say, here's the step 1, step 2, step 3. And they started to connect through those scenarios and say, okay, if I'm an individual in Calgary and I've got my Calgary EID and I get to benefits there, here's when I would go to ESDC to carry on that journey. We don't do that much anymore. At least I haven't seen that type of approach. And the most recent stuff I've seen is, I can go into my CBSA CRA account to be able to check where I'm at my taxes, and then I can pivot to go to Costco to use my same credentials to get tires. How often does that happen? Is that a scenario? So we need to really do some of that storyboarding. Thanks, everyone.
John, wow, thank you very much. I gotta say, on the interesting stuff per minute scale, like I think we've set a new high mark here. So thank you, John, for sharing like such a broad perspective on sort of where we've been, where we're going. The ideas that, you know, it's not just technology, but there's an awful lot we need to do in that space too, to make a bunch of these things work. You know, getting the data published is kind of a cultural phenomena. Making use of it though, you know, starts to become, you know, policy and tech, and how do we actually turn this into a practical solution? So that's fantastic.